The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, the kind where you can hear every tick of the clock and feel every bead of sweat forming on your skin. I sat at the defense table, my tie too tight, my hands gripping the edge of the wooden chair like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Across the aisle, my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, sat with her lawyer, a slick guy in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She leaned in close to him, whispering, her lips curling into a smirk that made my stomach twist. I'd seen that look before, back when we were happy, or at least when I thought we were. Now it felt like a blade aimed right at me. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair pulled back tight, banged her gavel, and the room snapped to attention. Her name was on a plaque, Honorable Celia Graves, and everyone said she didn't mess around. She called the session to order, her voice sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to my wife, to that smirk, to the way her fingers tapped the table like she was playing a game she'd already won. Her lawyer stood up, holding a thick file that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. He cleared his throat and started talking, his words smooth and practiced. He called it proof that I'd been hiding money, that I'd been emotionally unstable, that I'd walked out on our marriage without a word. Every accusation landed like a punch, and I felt my jaw clench tighter with each one. I wanted to stand up and shout that it was all lies, that I'd never done any of those things. But my attorney, a woman I'd hired on a budget, put her hand on my arm and shook her head. Stay calm, she told me before we walked in. Don't give them anything to use against you. So I sat there, silent, while the lawyer painted me as a monster. The judge listened, her face unreadable, jotting notes now and then. I wondered what she was thinking, if she believed any of it, if she saw through the act across the aisle. Then my wife looked at me. Not at the judge, not at her lawyer, but straight at me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, it was like we were the only two people in the room. She didn't say anything out loud, but her lips moved just enough for me to catch it. You won't get a penny. My blood ran cold. I'd heard her say things like that before, late at night when we argued, but this was different. This wasn't anger or frustration. This was calculated. Then she mouthed something else, slower, making sure I understood. I planned this for years. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Years? The word echoed in my head, bouncing around like a ricochet. Had she really been plotting this the whole time we were together? All those mornings we made coffee, all those nights we watched movies curled up on the couch, had it all been part of some long game to destroy me? I forced myself to look away, to focus on the judge instead. She was flipping through the file her lawyer had handed over, her brow furrowing as she read. I wondered what was in there, bank statements, maybe, or emails I'd never seen. Whatever it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I'd spent our marriage trying to build something, not tear it down. I'd worked long hours at the logistics firm, paid every bill on time, fixed every leak in the house. I'd loved her, trusted her, given her everything. And now here we were, in this sterile room with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, while she tried to rewrite our story. I glanced at my attorney again, hoping for some kind of signal, but she was scribbling notes, her face calm but focused. She'd warned me it would start like this, that her side would come out swinging. Still, knowing it was coming didn't make it hurt any less. The lawyer kept talking, piling on more claims, how I'd supposedly forged documents, how I'd left her to fend for herself. I wanted to laugh at how absurd it sounded, but there was nothing funny about it. The judge was listening, and that file in her hands was thick enough to make anyone doubt me. I thought about my wife's smirk again, about her whispering to her lawyer like they were sealing a deal. She'd always been good at getting what she wanted, charming clients, negotiating deals, turning heads wherever we went. I used to admire that about her. Now it terrified me. She wasn't just fighting for a divorce, she was fighting to erase me, to make sure I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back. I could feel the weight of it all pressing down, the room closing in, the air growing thinner. But then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was her smirk, or maybe it was the way she mouthed those words, so sure she'd won. Whatever it was, it lit a spark. I wasn't going to let her bury me. Not like this. I didn't know how I'd fight back yet. My attorney was still figuring out our next move, but I knew I wasn't going down without a swing. I straightened in my chair, loosened my grip on the armrest, and took a slow breath. The lawyer was still talking, but his words started to blur into the background. I looked at my wife again, and this time, I didn't flinch. Her smirk faltered, just for a second, like she'd seen something in my eyes she didn't expect. Good. Let her wonder. Let her think she had me figured out. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had something she didn't count on. I wasn't going to roll over. Not today, not ever. The judge banged her gavel again, calling for a recess, and as the room started to empty, I felt that spark grow a little stronger. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The courtroom faded from my mind as I sat in my car outside, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of how it all went so wrong. My thoughts drifted back to the beginning, to the night we met, when everything felt possible. It was a nonprofit gala for veterans, one of those events where people dress up to feel good about giving back. I was there because my logistics firm donated transport services, but I wasn't much for the spotlight. I stood near the bar, nursing a soda, watching the crowd laugh and mingle. Then I saw her elegance in a red dress, moving through the room like she owned it. Her laugh carried over the music, warm and alive, and when our eyes met, she didn't look away. She walked over, introduced herself, and asked what I did. I mumbled something about shipping schedules, expecting her to drift off, but she stayed. We talked for hours about her marketing job, my late nights at the warehouse, the way we both hated small talk but loved a good story. By the end of the night, I knew I wanted to see her again. She gave me her number and a smile that made my chest ache. I drove home feeling like the luckiest guy alive. Those early days were a blur of coffee dates and long walks. She'd tease me about my practical side, how I'd pack leftovers in Tupperware before we left a restaurant, but she'd say it with this look, like I was the only person who made sense to her. I told her things I hadn't told anyone, about growing up with a dad who worked too much, about wanting a life that meant something. She listened, really listened, and when she talked about her dreams, building her own agency, traveling the world, I believed she could do it. We fell hard and fast. 6 months later, I proposed on a pier at sunset, nothing fancy, just us and the sound of waves. She said yes, and I thought that was it. We'd cracked the code to forever. We got married in a small ceremony, her in a simple white dress, me in a suit I'd bought on sale. I remember looking at her during our vows, thinking she made me feel seen, like I wasn't just a guy grinding through life but someone who mattered. The first year was good, or at least I thought so. We rented a little house with creaky floors, spent weekends fixing it up, laughing about paint stains on our clothes. I'd come home from work to find her cooking dinner, humming some song I didn't know, and it felt like we were building something real. But looking back, I can see the cracks starting to form, small things I didn't question at the time. She'd suggest we put the house in her name when we bought it, said it was better for tax reasons, that her friend in real estate swore by it. I didn't know much about that stuff, so I agreed, signing the papers without a second thought. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife, the woman who'd laughed with me at 2 a.m. over burnt pancakes, who'd held my hand when I got bad news about a contract. It never crossed my mind she'd use that trust against me. Then there were the finances. She started handling our accounts, saying it was easier if one person took charge. I'd always been okay with money, paid bills on time, saved a little, but I wasn't great with the details. She was, or so she said. She'd sit at the kitchen table with her laptop, clicking through spreadsheets, telling me not to worry. I'd nod, grateful she was on top of it, and go back to whatever I was doing, fixing a shelf, watching a game. She'd bring me forms to sign sometimes, saying they were for refinancing or insurance, and I'd scribble my name without reading the fine print. I'd tease her about being the boss, and she'd laugh, but her eyes didn't always match her smile. I didn't notice it then, not really. I was too busy loving her, too caught up in the life we were supposed to have. Things shifted more as time went on. She'd get calls late at night, step outside to take them, saying it was a client or a work thing. I believed her because I wanted to. But there were moments, little ones, that stuck with me. Like the time I asked about our savings, just curious, and she got sharp, said I didn't need to stress about it. Or when she started traveling for work more, leaving for days without much explanation. I'd ask how it went, and she'd give me short answers, change the subject. I told myself it was normal, that couples go through phases. I didn't want to be the guy who nagged or doubted. But deep down, something felt off, like a song playing just out of tune. I'd lie awake at night, her side of the bed empty, wondering if I was imagining it. I'd think about that gala, her laugh, the way she made me feel like I could take on the world. I'd tell myself we'd get back to that we just needed time. Sitting in my car now, the memory of her smile from those days burned in my chest, but not in a good way. It was the same smile she'd given me in court, the one that said she'd already won. I realized I'd been blind, not just to her plans, but to how she'd played me from the start. Every sweet moment, every promise, had it all been a setup? Had she ever loved me, or was I just a step in her plan? The questions churned, and I felt my hands tighten on the wheel. I wanted to go back, to shake myself awake, to read those forms, to ask harder questions. But I couldn't. All I could do was face what was coming, figure out how to fight a battle I didn't even know I was in. The gala felt like a lifetime ago, and the man I was then, hopeful, trusting, he was gone. But I wasn't broken, not yet. I started the car, the engine rumbling low, and told myself I'd find a way through this. I had to. Sitting in the motel room that had become my temporary home, I stared at the peeling wallpaper and tried to piece together how I'd missed it all. The signs were there, plain as day now, but back then, I'd been too wrapped up in loving her to notice. Our house, the one we'd bought together, or so I thought, felt like a distant memory, but it was where her plans started taking shape. I could still picture the kitchen, the way the morning light hit the countertops, how she'd sit there with a cup of coffee and a smile that made everything seem okay. But looking back, that smile had something else, something I didn't see until it was too late. She'd been setting me up, piece by piece, and I'd walked right into it, signing my name on dotted lines without a second thought. The quiet moments, the ones I'd thought were just life, were the foundation of her betrayal, and I was kicking myself for not paying closer attention. It started with small things, stuff I didn't think twice about. She'd always been better with numbers, or at least she acted like it. One evening, maybe a year into owning the house, she slid her laptop toward me while we were eating dinner. She said we needed to update some accounts, make things easier to manage. I was halfway through a bite of chicken, tired from a long day at the warehouse, and I just nodded. She'd tap away, show me where to click, and I'd follow along, not really listening to the details. She'd say things like, "It's better if I handle the logins, less clutter for you." I'd laugh, call her the brains of the operation, and let it go. I didn't check the accounts myself. Why would I? We were a team, or so I believed. I'd spent my days making sure trucks got where they needed to go, dealing with drivers and deadlines. Coming home to her was supposed to be the easy part, the part where I didn't have to question anything. Then there were the forms. I can still see her at the kitchen table, her hair pulled back, a pen in her hand, looking like she had it all under control. She'd hand me papers during breakfast, saying they were for refinancing the mortgage or updating insurance, nothing major, just routine stuff. I'd be rushing to get out the door, coffee in one hand, and I'd scribble my signature without reading. She'd smile, say, "Thanks, babe, I'll take care of the rest." I trusted her. That's what you do when you love someone. You don't hover, you don't doubt. But now, sitting in this dingy motel with a flickering light bulb, I realized those forms weren't what she said. They were steps in a plan, a way to shift things out of my name, to make it look like I was stepping back from our life. I'd been so tired, so willing to let her take the lead, that I didn't see her building a case against me. She got smarter about it over time. I'd ask about our savings once in a while, just casual, and she'd wave it off. "Everything's fine," she'd say, her voice light but her eyes sharp. If I pushed, she'd get annoyed, make me feel like I was accusing her of something. I'd back off, not wanting to start a fight. She started handling my email too, said it was easier if she filtered out the junk. I didn't mind at first. I hated dealing with spam. But then I'd notice things missing, like bank alerts or bills I used to see. When I brought it up, she'd say I must have deleted them by accident, that she'd fix it. I believed her because I wanted to, because the alternative, thinking she was hiding something, felt like a betrayal of everything we built. I'd tell myself I was overthinking, that marriage meant trusting each other, even when things felt a little off. The real gut punch came later, though. I remember the day I came home from work, my truck kicking up dust in the driveway, and found the front door locked. My key didn't work. I tried it again, thinking it was stuck, but the deadbolt wouldn't budge. I knocked, called her name, but the house was quiet. That's when I saw the boxes on the porch, my clothes, my books, a few old trophies from high school, all packed up like I was some tenant getting evicted. There was a letter taped to one of the boxes, typed, not even in her handwriting. It said I'd voluntarily vacated the home and that any future contact had to go through her lawyer. I stood there, the paper shaking in my hand, feeling like the ground had dropped out from under me. Vacated? I hadn't gone anywhere. I'd been at work, same as always, coming home to the life we'd made. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I banged on the door until my knuckles hurt, but no one answered. The neighbors must have heard, but I didn't care. I just wanted to understand. That night, I slept in my truck, the letter crumpled on the passenger seat. I kept rereading it, looking for some clue, some hint of what I'd missed. My mind raced through every moment, every form, every time she'd brushed off my questions. It was all there, staring me in the face, but I hadn't seen it. She'd been moving pieces around like a chess game, setting me up to lose everything. My name was off the house, off the accounts, off the life I thought was ours. I felt like I was losing my mind, like I'd woken up in someone else's story. I wanted to scream, to drive back and demand answers, but what good would that do? She'd already changed the locks, changed the rules. I was out, and she was in control, or so she thought. Lying on the motel bed now, the springs creaking under me, I felt that same anger bubbling up, but it wasn't just anger. It was clarity. She'd played me, sure, but I wasn't invisible. I'd signed those forms, trusted her blindly, but I wasn't stupid. I remembered things, dates, conversations, the way her voice changed when she lied. I didn't know how yet, but I'd find a way to fight back. The motel room smelled like stale cigarettes, and the walls were thin, but it was mine for now. It was a start. I closed my eyes, picturing her at that kitchen table, her smile so perfect, so practiced. She thought she'd won. She was wrong. The motel room smelled like damp carpet and regret, but it was all I had left after she took everything else. I sat on the edge of the bed, the springs groaning under me, staring at my phone as another bank alert popped up, another account drained, another card declined. My life, the one I'd built with sweat and long hours, was slipping through my fingers, and I was stuck in this hole off Route 71 trying to figure out how to claw my way back. She'd planned it so well, every move calculated, every lie polished until it shone like truth. I'd come home to find my stuff on the porch, the locks changed, and a letter saying I'd vacated our life. Now, weeks later, I was still reeling, piecing together how she'd turned me into a stranger in my own story. My accounts were empty, my car repossessed, my name erased from everything we'd shared. She'd made it look like I'd run off, like I'd been the one scheming all along. But sitting there, with the hum of the motel's busted air conditioner in the background, I felt something shift inside me, a stubborn spark that refused to let her win. I thought back to the first signs of trouble, the ones I'd ignored because I didn't want to believe she'd betray me. It started with the bank calls, maybe 6 months before the divorce papers showed up. I'd get voicemail saying my card was declined at some store I'd never been to, or that a payment had bounced. I'd call back, confused, and the bank would say it was a mix-up, that the account was fine. I'd mention it to her over dinner, expecting her to be as puzzled as I was, but she'd just shrug, say it was probably a glitch, that she'd handle it. I let her. I was working overtime, dealing with a new client who kept changing deadlines, and I didn't have the energy to dig deeper. She'd always been better with that stuff anyway, or so she'd made me think. Looking back, those calls weren't glitches. They were her testing the waters, moving money, setting up her story while I was too busy to notice. Then the car vanished. I'd parked it at work one day, same spot as always, but when I came out, it was gone. I thought it was stolen, called the cops in a panic, but they said it had been repossessed, something about missed payments on a loan I didn't even know I had. I stood in the parking lot, my breath fogging in the cold, trying to make sense of it. I'd paid for that car outright, years ago, before we were even married. There was no loan. But when I got home, or tried to, before the locks changed, she had papers saying I'd signed for it, that I'd defaulted. I argued, said it wasn't true, but her voice was ice. You need to stop lying to yourself. That's when I started feeling like I was drowning, like every solid thing in my life was turning to quicksand. Now, in the motel, I was down to a duffel bag of clothes and a burner phone I'd bought when my old one got cut off. Her lawyer's letters kept coming, each one sharper than the last. They said I was unstable, that I'd forged signatures, that I'd abandoned our marriage without a word. Every claim was a brick in the wall she was building to bury me. I'd read them at the motel's wobbly table, the words blurring as my head pounded. She wasn't just trying to win the divorce, she was trying to ruin me, to make sure I had nothing left to stand on. I'd lie awake at night, the neon sign outside my window buzzing, wondering how I'd let it come to this. I trusted her, loved her, given her every piece of me, and she'd used it to craft a lie so convincing even I started to doubt myself. But she'd made one mistake. She thought I wouldn't fight back. She thought I'd crumble under the weight of her story, that I'd let her rewrite me into nothing. She didn't know how well I pay attention when it matters. I've always been good at details, even if I let her handle the big picture. I remembered things, dates, conversations, the way her voice caught when she was hiding something. I started writing them down, every memory I could grab, on a notepad I'd bought for $1 at the gas station. The time she'd rushed me to sign a form before work. The way she'd changed the subject when I asked about our savings. The email she'd sent herself from my account, thinking I wouldn't notice. It wasn't much, but it was something. and something was enough to keep me going. That's when I found Aisha Brennan. I'd been scrolling through legal aid ads on the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, looking for anyone who'd take a case like mine without charging a fortune. Her website was simple, no flashy promises, just a line about fighting for people who'd been backed into a corner. I called her from the burner phone, my voice hoarse from not talking to anyone in days. I told her everything, the changed locks, the empty accounts, the letters accusing me of things I'd never done. I half expected her to brush me off, but she listened, asked sharp questions, and didn't sugarcoat it. "This is going to be tough," she said, "but I believe you. We'll fight smart, not loud." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. Aisha was different, part lawyer, part detective, with a knack for spotting lies and paperwork. She didn't promise miracles, but she gave me a plan, and that was more than I'd had in a long time. Sitting in the motel now, I looked at the notepad on the table, my scribbled memories filling the pages. It wasn't a weapon yet, but it was a start. Aisha had already requested some records, things like bank statements and property deeds, to see what we could challenge. I didn't know if it'd be enough, but I wasn't the guy who'd stood on that porch, stunned and helpless. I was angry, sure, but it was a focused kind of angry, the kind that sharpens your edges instead of breaking you. I thought about her, probably in our house, thinking she'd won. She hadn't. I'd lost a lot. My home, my savings, my trust, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had my fight, and I was going to use it. The motel room wasn't much, but it was mine for now, and that was enough to keep me moving forward. The motel room felt smaller every day, but I wasn't ready to give up, not after everything she'd taken. I sat at the wobbly table, my notepad full of scribbled memories spread out like a map to a fight I was just starting to understand. Aisha's office was my next stop, a cramped space downtown with stacks of files and a coffee maker that never stopped brewing. I'd been working with her for a couple of weeks now, and she was the only person who didn't look at me like I was already beaten. Today, though, I had something real to show her, something that could change the game. It wasn't much, just an old flash drive I'd found in a box of office stuff I'd grabbed before the locks changed, but it was enough to make my pulse race. I'd plugged it into a library computer the night before, and what I found sent a jolt through me, a lifeline in a sea of lies. Driving to Aisha's, I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other patting my pocket, making sure the drive was still there. This was my shot, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. Aisha's office smelled like paper and determination. She waved me in, her desk buried under folders, but her eyes sharp as ever. I sat down, the plastic chair creaking, and pulled out the flash drive. "Found this in some old stuff," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's got backups, logs, receipts, emails. Things I didn't even know I'd saved." She took it, her brow furrowing as she plugged it into her laptop. I watched the screen light up her face, my stomach twisting as I remembered what I'd seen the night before. There were cloud backups of our joint accounts, showing transfers I'd never authorized. There were receipts for payments to companies I'd never heard of. And then there was the email, one she'd forwarded to herself from my account, probably thinking I'd never notice. I could still hear her voice in my head, smug and certain, from a recording I'd found linked to that email. She'd said, "He'll never know what's real. I'll bury him in forged contracts." Those words had kept me up all night, not just because of what they meant, but because they proved I wasn't crazy. Aisha clicked through the files, her fingers moving fast, her expression shifting from curious to intense. "This is good," she muttered, almost to herself. "Really good." She paused on the email, reading it twice, then played the recording. Her voice filled the room, calm, cold, like she was discussing a business deal, not my life. Aisha leaned back, her chair squeaking, and looked at me. "This isn't just a divorce case anymore," she said. "This is fraud, maybe worse. She didn't just lie. She planned to destroy you, and she documented it." My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something else. Hope, maybe, or the start of it. I'd spent weeks feeling like a ghost, like everything I'd built had been erased, but this drive was proof I'd existed, that I'd been paying attention even when I didn't know it. We spent the next hour digging deeper. Aisha pulled up the metadata on the email, showing it hadn't been tampered with, that it came straight from her account. The recording was time-stamped, clear as day, and the backups matched dates when money started disappearing. She scribbled notes, her pen flying across a legal pad, and I sat there, letting it sink in. I'd always thought of evidence as something big, like a smoking gun in a movie, but this was better, quiet, undeniable, a trail she'd left because she thought I'd never look. Aisha stopped writing and tapped the screen. "There's a name in here," she said, pointing to a receipt. "Marcus Levitt. Shows up on a transfer to an offshore account. Same one she's claiming you hid money in." I leaned forward, squinting at the name. It didn't ring a bell, but Aisha's voice had an edge now. "If we can tie him to her, we've got something solid." She explained what came next: subpoenas for digital logs, bank records, anything that could prove Marcus was involved. I nodded, trying to keep up, but my mind was racing. Marcus Levitt. Whoever he was, he'd helped her pull this off, maybe even signed off on the forged documents she was using to paint me as the bad guy. I thought about the papers her lawyer had waved in court, the ones that said I'd hidden money and abandoned her. They'd looked so real, so official, but now I wondered if Marcus's name was buried in them too. Aisha was already typing, drafting requests to pull his records, her focus like a laser. "This guy's our key," she said. "If he's sloppy, or if he's scared, he'll talk. And if he talks, her whole story falls apart." I left her office with a plan, something I hadn't had in months. The flash drive was still with Aisha. She'd make copies, keep it safe, but I felt its weight in my pocket anyway, like a talisman. Driving back to the motel, I replayed the recording in my head, her voice so sure she'd won. It made me angry, but not the kind of angry that makes you want to yell. This was colder, sharper, the kind that keeps you awake and thinking. I'd been a step behind her for too long, trusting her while she built a trap. But now I was catching up. I didn't have the house or the money or the life I'd had a year ago, but I had this. One small piece of truth she didn't expect me to find, and I was going to use it. Back at the motel, I sat on the bed, the springs creaking as I pulled out my notepad. I wrote down everything Aisha had said, every step we'd take next. Subpoenas. Marcus Levitt. Metadata. It felt good to have something to do, something to hold on to. I thought about her, probably in our old house, thinking she'd outsmarted me. She didn't know about the drive, didn't know I was starting to see through her lies. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the guy who'd lost everything. I felt like the guy who'd found a way to fight back. The motel's neon sign buzzed outside, casting a red glow through the curtains, but I didn't mind. I had a plan, a good lawyer, and a piece of evidence she couldn't erase. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. I closed the notepad, leaned back, and let myself believe, just for a moment, that I could win this. The courtroom air felt heavier today, like the weight of every lie she'd told was pressing down on the room. I sat at the defense table, my hands steady for once, watching her across the aisle. She was polished as ever, hair perfect, dress crisp, her face a mask of calm confidence. But I knew better now. That flash drive Aisha was holding, tucked safely in her briefcase, had changed everything. I'd spent weeks feeling like a man unmoored, my life stolen by her careful plans, but today was different. Today, I wasn't just reacting, I was ready. The judge called the session to order, her gavel a sharp crack that silenced the murmurs. Aisha sat beside me, her notebook open, her pen tapping softly. She'd warned me this would be rough. Her side was coming hard with their so-called evidence, but I wasn't scared anymore. I'd seen the truth on that drive, heard her voice admitting she'd bury me in lies. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. Her lawyer stood first, a tall guy with a voice that carried like he was born for this. He held up a stack of papers, his tone dripping with certainty as he addressed the judge. He said they had proof, emails I'd supposedly sent, loan agreements I'd supposedly signed, bank records showing I'd hidden money in accounts she didn't know about. Every word was a jab, painting me as a schemer who'd planned to leave her penniless. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't flinch. Aisha had coached me, stay calm, let them overplay their hand. So I listened as he described a version of me that didn't exist, a guy who'd plotted and lied while she played the innocent victim. The judge leaned forward, her glasses glinting under the fluorescent lights, flipping through the documents he'd handed her. She looked interested, and for a second, my stomach twisted. What if she believed it? What if those papers looked real enough to fool her? Then she took the stand. She walked up with the grace of someone who'd rehearsed every step, her eyes soft and her voice steady. She told the judge how I'd grown distant, how I'd started hiding things, money, plans, my feelings. She said she'd found the emails by accident, that she'd been shocked to see I'd moved money offshore, that I'd left her to deal with bills while I prepared to walk away. Her words were smooth, practiced, each one landing like a carefully aimed dart. She even managed to tear, dabbing it with a tissue her lawyer handed her. I wanted to stand up, to shout that it was all a lie, that she'd been the one moving money, changing locks, building a case while I was still trying to fix our marriage. But Aisha's hand brushed my arm, a quiet reminder to stay still. I took a breath, forcing myself to focus on the judge, not her. The judge was watching closely, her pen moving as she took notes, her face giving nothing away. Her lawyer stepped up again, holding one of the emails like it was a trophy. He read it aloud, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. It was supposed to be from me, saying I'd set up an account she'd never find, that I was done with the marriage and didn't care what happened to her. The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were so far from who I was. I'd spent years building a life with her, paying every bill, fixing every broken thing in that house. I'd loved her, trusted her, even when she started pulling away. To hear her twist that into this story, to make me sound like a stranger, it burned. But I remembered what Aisha said, her evidence only worked if we couldn't prove it was fake. And we could. The flash drive was our ace, sitting quietly in her briefcase, waiting for its moment. She stayed calm through it all, answering her lawyer's questions with a mix of sadness and strength, like she was the one fighting for justice. She said she'd only filed for divorce to protect herself, that she'd tried to save our marriage, but I'd given her no choice. The judge nodded slightly, and I felt a flicker of doubt. Was she buying it? Her lawyer smirked as he wrapped up, saying the evidence was clear. I'd been deceptive, absent, a husband who'd abandoned his wife. He asked the judge to award her everything, the house, the accounts, even damages for the stress I'd caused. I glanced at Aisha, expecting her to look worried, but her eyes were steady, focused. She leaned over and whispered, "They're overconfident. That's good for us." I nodded, trusting her, but my heart was still pounding. The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with the weight of their accusations. Then it was our turn. Aisha stood, but she didn't start with questions or arguments. She just looked at the judge and said we'd have our response soon, that we were still gathering records. It was a stall, I knew, a way to keep them guessing while we lined up our shot. The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded, saying we'd reconvene in a few days. I felt a mix of relief and frustration. I wanted to fight now, to show what we had, but Aisha was right. We needed to be sure, to make our move when it would hit hardest. As her lawyer packed up, he shot me a look, like he thought I was already done. She didn't look at me at all, just whispered something to him, her face unreadable. I wondered what she was thinking, if she sensed we had something up our sleeve. She'd always been good at reading people, but this time, I hoped she was blind to what was coming. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt the flash drive's weight in my mind, even if it was still with Aisha. It held her voice, her plan, her mistake, proof she'd forged those emails, those agreements, all of it. I thought about Marcus Levitt, the name we'd found, the guy who'd helped her move money offshore. Aisha was already working to subpoena his records, to tie him to her lies. I didn't know how it would play out, but I knew we were close. I stood still in the hallway, waiting for the right moment to move. My hands were steady, my mind clear. I was ready to turn this around, to show the judge who'd really been lying. The courtroom doors closed behind me, but I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving with a plan, and that was enough to keep me standing tall. The courtroom was quieter today, but the tension was thicker than ever, like the air itself was holding its breath. I sat at the defense table, my hands resting on the wood, feeling the grain under my fingers as I kept my eyes on the judge. She was flipping through a stack of papers, her face as unreadable as stone, but I knew this was the moment we'd been waiting for. Aisha sat beside me, her briefcase open, the flash drive ready to go. I could feel my pulse in my throat, steady but strong, because today wasn't about taking punches, it was about throwing one. Her side had spent weeks building their case, piling lies on top of lies, but we'd been patient, lining up our evidence, waiting for the perfect opening. Now it was here, and I was ready to show the truth, to let her own words tear her story apart. The judge called the session to order, her gavel a sharp snap, and I straightened in my chair, knowing this was the day everything would change. Her lawyer started, his voice as smooth as ever, trying to hammer home their narrative. He brought up the same forged emails and loan agreements, saying they proved I'd been hiding money, and planning to leave her high and dry. I listened, but it didn't sting like before. I'd heard it all already, and now I knew it was fake. Every word, every signature, every date she'd backdated to make me look guilty. Aisha didn't react either, just jotted notes, her pen moving like she was checking items off a list. The lawyer finished with a flourish, asking the judge to rule in her favor, to give her the house, the accounts, everything she claimed I'd tried to steal. I glanced at her across the aisle, expecting that smug smirk, but her face was blank, her eyes fixed on the judge. Maybe she sensed something was off. Good. Let her sweat. Then it was our turn. Aisha stood, her voice calm but firm, and asked to present new evidence. The judge nodded, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was it. Aisha handed me the flash drive, its weight light in my palm, but heavy with everything it held. Her voice, her plan, her mistake. I walked to the front, my step steady, and faced the judge. "Your Honor," I said, my voice quieter than I'd expected but clear enough to carry. "May I show one thing?" The room went still. Her lawyer froze, his pen hovering over his notepad. She shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the table just a little too tight. The judge raised an eyebrow but motioned for me to continue. I handed her the drive and explained what was on it: digital trails of asset transfers, metadata from the forged documents, an email she'd sent herself, and a voice recording where she bragged about destroying me financially. I kept it simple, letting the evidence speak for itself, but inside, my heart was pounding like a drum. The judge plugged the drive into her laptop, and the bailiff dimmed the lights so everyone could see the screen projected on the wall. Aisha had prepped the files, so it only took a moment to pull up the email. There it was, sent from my account to hers, but the metadata showed she'd logged in herself, thinking I'd never check. The judge scrolled through the bank logs next, showing transfers to an offshore account I'd never touched, transfers linked to Marcus Levitt, the name we'd found. Then Aisha clicked on the recording. The room was so quiet I could hear someone cough in the back. Her voice came through the speakers, cold and certain. "I don't need to fight him in real life. I've already erased him on paper." She went on, saying she'd bury me in forged contracts, that I'd never know what hit me. Every word was a nail in her case, and I watched her face as it played. Her calm mask cracked, her eyes widening, her hands clenching into fists. For the first time, she looked scared. The silence after the recording stopped was deafening. The judge leaned back, her glasses catching the light as she looked at her lawyer. He started to stand, stammering something about needing context, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "I'd like to hear from the plaintiff," she said, her voice sharp. She was called to the stand, her steps slower than before, like she was walking through mud. Aisha didn't waste time. She asked simple questions. Did she recognize her voice? Had she sent that email? Did she know Marcus Levitt? Her answers were shaky, full of pauses and vague excuses. She said the recording was a misunderstanding, that she'd been venting, not planning. But the judge wasn't buying it. She kept glancing at the screen, where the email and logs were still displayed, undeniable proof of her lies. I sat back, letting Aisha do her work, feeling a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because the truth was finally out, anger because she thought she could get away with it. Her lawyer tried to recover, saying the evidence wasn't conclusive, that we could have tampered with it. Aisha was ready for that. She handed the judge a report from a digital forensics expert we'd hired, confirming the files were untouched, the timestamps authentic. The judge read it slowly, her pen tapping the desk, and I could see her lawyer's confidence draining away. He sat down, whispering to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared at the floor, her hands folded tight in her lap. I wondered what was going through her head, regret, maybe, or just panic that her plan had unraveled. I didn't care much either way. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about showing the truth, about taking back what she'd tried to steal, not just the money or the house, but my name, my life. The judge dismissed us for a recess, saying she'd review the evidence further, but I could tell we'd shaken things up. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying a weight I could finally set down. Aisha clapped me on the shoulder, a rare smile breaking through her usual focus. "We got her," she said quietly. I nodded, but I didn't smile back, not yet. This was a win, but it wasn't the end. Her lies were crumbling, and I was standing taller because of it. The hallway outside was busy with people, but I felt steady, grounded, like the man I used to be before she tried to erase me. I was ready for whatever came next. The courtroom victory still buzzed in my veins, but I knew it wasn't over yet. Walking out after showing that flash drive felt like I'd finally landed a hit, but her side wasn't going to fold easily. I sat in Aisha's office a few days later, the hum of her printer filling the quiet as she prepped for the next step. The flash drive had cracked her story wide open. Her voice on that recording, bragging about forging contracts, was something she couldn't talk her way out of. But Aisha wasn't one to rest on a single win. She was already chasing the next piece, Marcus Levitt, the guy whose name had popped up in those offshore transfers. If we could get him to talk, to confirm she'd orchestrated it all, her case would collapse for good. I leaned back in the creaky chair, my hands folded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and fire. She tried to bury me, but I was digging my way out, and every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Aisha slid a file across her desk, her eyes sharp despite the late hour. "We've got Marcus scheduled for a deposition tomorrow," she said, tapping the folder. "If he corroborates what's on the drive, we're golden. If he doesn't, we still have enough to push for sanctions." I nodded, my mind racing back to that name, Marcus Levitt. I didn't know him, had never met him, but he was tied to her plan, a shadow in the background helping her move money and fake documents. The bank logs we'd found showed his signature on transfers she claimed I'd made, and the email on the drive mentioned him like he was her go-to for dirty work. Aisha had tracked him down through a compliance firm, some outfit that handled shady accounts for people with too much money and not enough morals. She'd subpoenaed his records, and now we were about to face him head-on. I wondered what he'd say, if he'd try to cover for her or save his own skin. The deposition was set for a conference room at the courthouse, a smaller space than the courtroom, but just as tense. I sat next to Aisha, watching Marcus walk in, a wiry guy with thinning hair and a nervous twitch in his hands. He didn't look like a mastermind, just a cog in her machine, but his answers could make or break us. Aisha started easy, asking about his job, his role at the compliance firm, his history with offshore accounts. He answered in short bursts, his eyes darting to the stenographer like he wasn't sure what was being recorded. Then she got to the point, pulling up the bank logs from the flash drive and asking if he recognized the transfers. His face tightened, but he nodded, saying he'd processed them as instructed. Aisha leaned forward, her voice steady. "Instructed by whom?" she asked. Marcus hesitated, his fingers drumming the table, and I felt my chest tighten. This was it. The moment he'd either point the finger at her or try to dodge. He didn't dodge. "I got the orders from her," he said finally, his voice low. "She sent me the details, amounts, dates, account numbers. Said it was all above board." Aisha didn't let up, asking for specifics, pulling out the email where she'd mentioned his name. Marcus squirmed, admitting he'd followed her instructions to backdate documents, to make it look like I'd authorized the transfers. He said she'd promised him a cut, nothing big, just enough to keep him quiet. I sat still, my hands clenched under the table, listening as he unraveled her plan piece by piece. Every word was another crack in her story, another proof she'd lied, not just to me, but to the court, to everyone. Aisha pushed him on the forged signatures, showing him the loan agreements her lawyer had waved around. Marcus confirmed they were fake, that he'd helped her draft them to match my handwriting from old forms she'd kept. Her lawyer was there too, trying to interrupt, saying Marcus wasn't credible, that he could be lying to save himself. But Aisha was ready, handing over digital forensics reports that matched Marcus's story to the metadata on the drive. The room felt smaller with every answer, like the walls were closing in on her side. I didn't say anything. Aisha had told me to let her handle it, but I couldn't help picturing her face, the way her calm mask would crumble when she heard Marcus had flipped. He wasn't loyal, not like she'd thought. He was just a guy who'd taken her money and now saw the writing on the wall. By the time the deposition ended, Aisha had enough to file for a fraud investigation, and I felt something I hadn't in months: power. Not the kind that comes from yelling or fighting, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you've got the truth on your side. Back in court a week later, Aisha presented Marcus's testimony, tying it to the flash drive and the forensics. Her lawyer tried to push for a settlement, saying we could avoid dragging things out, but the judge wasn't having it. She leaned forward, her voice like ice, saying, "This court takes fraudulent evidence seriously. I'm not inclined to let this slide." I watched her across the aisle, and for the first time, she looked small. No smirk, no whispers to her lawyer, just a woman who'd played a game and lost. Her hands were folded tight, her eyes fixed on the table, and I could almost feel the panic radiating off her. The judge didn't rule yet. She wanted more time to review, but the shift was clear. The balance had tipped, and it wasn't in her favor anymore. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the sun on my face, warmer than it had been in weeks. Aisha was talking about next steps, filing motions, preparing for the final hearing, but I was only half listening. My mind was on Marcus, on the flash drive, on the way her voice had echoed in that courtroom, admitting her own lies. She'd thought she could erase me, but I was still here, still fighting. The motel was waiting for me, same as always, but it didn't feel like a cage anymore. It was just a place to rest until the next round. I'd lost a lot, my home, my trust, but I'd gained something too, the strength to stand up and prove I wasn't what she'd made me out to be. The truth was out now, and it was heavier than any lie she could spin. I was ready for the endgame, whatever it brought. The final hearing was here, and the courtroom felt different this time, like the air was charged with something final, something unstoppable. I sat at the defense table, my hands resting easy on the wood, no longer gripping it like a lifeline. Aisha was next to me, her files neatly stacked, her calm confidence a steady anchor. We'd laid it all bare, her lies, her forged documents, Marcus's testimony, that damning recording on the flash drive. Weeks of fighting had led to this, and I could feel it in my bones. Today was the day the truth would win. Across the aisle, she sat with her lawyer, her posture stiff, her face a blank mask that didn't fool me anymore. I'd seen her unravel when her own voice played in court, seen the panic in her eyes when Marcus flipped. She wasn't the untouchable strategist she'd been at the start. She was just a woman who'd gambled everything on a lie and was about to lose. The judge walked in, her robe swishing, and called the session to order. I took a slow breath, ready for whatever came next. The judge didn't waste time. She started by summarizing the case, her voice clipped and precise, laying out the claims, her accusations that I'd hidden money and abandoned our marriage, our counterclaims of fraud and fabricated evidence. She mentioned the flash drive, Marcus's deposition, the digital forensics that proved her documents were fake. Every word was a brick in the wall we built, solid and unshakable. Her lawyer stood, trying one last time to spin it, saying the evidence was circumstantial, that Marcus wasn't reliable, that I'd still been an absent husband. But his voice lacked the swagger it had weeks ago, and the judge barely looked at him. She was focused on her notes, her pen tapping the desk, her glasses catching the light as she read through Aisha's filings. I glanced at Aisha, expecting a nod or a whisper, but she just watched the judge, her eyes steady, like she knew we'd already done enough. Then the judge spoke, and the room seemed to shrink around her words. She said the evidence was clear. Her claims rested on forged documents and manipulated accounts, backed by testimony that confirmed her intent to deceive the court. She cited the recording, the email, the bank logs tied to Marcus, all of it painting a picture of deliberate fraud. My chest tightened, not with fear but with relief, like a knot I'd carried for months was finally loosening. The judge didn't stop there. She ruled that I'd have full access to our marital estate, every account, every asset she tried to lock me out of. She awarded damages for the financial harm her actions had caused, a number that made my head spin but wasn't what mattered most. The real blow came when she said the forged evidence was being referred for a criminal investigation. That hit like a thunderclap. I watched her across the aisle, saw her hands tremble, saw her lawyer lean in to whisper something she didn't seem to hear. For the first time, she looked defeated, like the weight of her own lies had finally crushed her. The judge turned to me then, her voice softer but still firm. "You've been more than patient," she said, her eyes meeting mine over her glasses. "The court apologizes for what you endured." Those words landed harder than I expected. I'd spent so long feeling invisible, like my side of the story didn't matter, that hearing her say it, acknowledging the hell I'd been through, felt like a lifeline. I nodded, my throat tight, not trusting myself to speak. Aisha touched my arm, a quick gesture that said we'd done it. The judge banged her gavel, finalizing the ruling, and the room started to empty, but I stayed seated for a moment, letting it sink in. I'd walked into this fight with nothing, no home, no money, just a flash drive and a stubborn refusal to give up. Now I was walking out with my life back, or at least the pieces to rebuild it. She didn't look at me as she left, her lawyer guiding her out like she might collapse without him. I wondered what she was thinking, regret, maybe, or just anger that her plan had failed. I didn't care much either way. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about proving I wasn't the man she tried to make me out to be. I thought back to the motel, to the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I'd ever get here. I doubted myself, doubted I could fight someone so calculated, so sure she'd won. But I had. not by yelling or begging, but by holding on to the truth and letting it do the talking. Aisha packed up her files, giving me a small smile. "You ready to move on?" she asked. I nodded, standing up, feeling taller than I had in months. Outside, the courthouse steps were crowded with people, but I felt alone in the best way, like I'd carved out a space that was mine again. The sun was high, warming my face, and I stood there for a minute, breathing it in. The money, the house, the damages, they were important, sure, but they weren't the real victory. The real victory was standing here, knowing I'd fought back and won, knowing I'd taken her best shot and come out stronger. I thought about the flash drive, about Marcus's nervous voice, about her smug smirk fading as her lies fell apart. Every piece had built this moment, and it wasn't just about the verdict. It was about proving to myself I could still stand up, still fight, still be the man I'd forgotten how to be. I walked to my car, the keys jingling in my hand, and felt a quiet strength settle in my chest. The fight wasn't over, not completely. There'd be paperwork, maybe more hearings if the criminal investigation went forward, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd faced her in that courtroom, faced her lies, and come out whole. The road ahead was open now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could choose where it led. I started the engine, the rumble steady under me, and drove away from the courthouse, not looking back. The victory wasn't loud or flashy, it was mine, hard-earned and real, and that was enough to carry me forward. The river outside my new apartment sparkled under the afternoon sun, a quiet reminder that life could still be beautiful, even after everything. I stood by the window, a mug of coffee in my hand, taking in the view, nothing fancy, just water and trees, but it was mine. The place was small, a one-bedroom with bare walls and furniture I'd picked out myself, no one else's taste dictating the space. It had been weeks since the final hearing, since the judge's ruling gave me back my share of the life she tried to steal. The money was nice, sure, and the damages helped, but what mattered more was the feeling of breathing again, of waking up without a fight hanging over me. I'd spent so long in that motel, in courtrooms, in my own head, battling her lies. Now, standing here, I was starting to feel like a man who'd found his footing again, not just a guy who'd survived. I thought back to the days after the verdict, when the dust was still settling. Aisha had handled the paperwork, making sure the accounts were unfrozen, the house sorted out, the damages processed. I didn't go back to that house. It was too full of her, of the life we'd had before I saw her for who she was. Instead, I sold my share and used it to start over, to rent this place and buy a few things that felt like mine. A bed with a frame I built myself, a couch that didn't smell like motel dampness, a table where I could sit and think without a lawyer's letters staring me down. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and after months of fighting for the truth, honest felt like a luxury. I'd walk through the apartment sometimes, touching the walls, the doorknobs, just to remind myself it was real, that I wasn't dreaming. The fight had changed me, no question. I wasn't the guy who'd met her at that gala, all hope and blind trust, nor was I the guy who'd stood on that porch, stunned by changed locks and a typed letter. I was someone new, stronger, maybe, but quieter too. I'd learned to pay attention, to question things I'd once let slide. I didn't sign anything without reading it now, didn't take anyone's word without proof. It wasn't about being paranoid. It was about knowing my worth, knowing I deserved better than being played. I'd spent too long letting her handle the details, thinking love meant not asking questions. Now I knew love didn't mean blindness, and strength didn't mean yelling. It meant standing up, even when you're shaking, and saying what needs to be said. That's why I started volunteering at a men's legal aid group downtown. I'd found them online, a small outfit helping guys like me, guys who'd been blindsided, who didn't know their rights or how to fight back. I'd go in a couple times a week, sit with them in a room that smelled like old coffee, and share what I'd learned. I didn't have a law degree, but I had a story, and sometimes that was enough. I'd tell them about the flash drive, about Marcus's testimony, about the moment I stood up in court and asked to show one thing. I'd watch their eyes change, from hopeless to curious, as I explained how I'd kept notes, how I'd trusted my gut when it told me something was off. You don't need to be loud, I'd say. You just need to document. Truth doesn't always roar, it waits. They'd nod, some scribbling down tips, others just listening, and I'd feel like I was giving them a piece of the strength I'd found. It wasn't always easy. Some days, I'd come home from the center and feel the weight of it all again. Her smirk in court, Her voice on that recording, the way she'd planned to erase me. I'd sit by the river, watching the water move, and let the memories come. I didn't push them away anymore. They were part of me, like the scars you get from a fight you win. I'd think about her sometimes, wonder where she was, if the criminal investigation had gone anywhere. Aisha had mentioned it was still pending, but I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. She wasn't my fight anymore. She'd lost the moment her lies hit the courtroom speakers, the moment the judge saw through her. Whatever happened to her now was her own doing, not mine. The river helped with that, with letting go. I'd walk along its banks in the evenings, the air cool and sharp, and feel the world settle around me. I'd think about the guys at the center, about the ones who'd started fighting their own battles because of something I'd said. I'd think about Aisha, who'd believed in me when I could barely believe in myself, and the judge, whose apology had felt like a door opening. I'd even think about the old me, the one who'd loved her without question, and I didn't hate him anymore. He'd been naive, sure, but he'd also been the guy who'd kept that flash drive, who'd remembered enough to fight back. That guy was still in me, just wiser now, with clearer eyes. Standing by the window now, I set my coffee down and looked at the river again. It moved steady, never rushing, like it knew where it was going. I was starting to feel that way too. I didn't have it all figured out, money was tight, the future was fuzzy, but I had enough. A place to call mine, a purpose at the legal center, a story that wasn't finished. I'd walk through fire and come out standing, not because I was louder or smarter than her, but because I'd held on to the truth when it mattered. I'd stood in that courtroom, looked the judge in the eye, and said, "May I show one thing?" That moment wasn't just a win, it was me, reclaiming who I was. I picked up my keys, ready to head to the center for another day of helping guys find their own way. The river kept flowing outside, and I stepped into the world feeling steady, knowing I'd earned every bit of the peace I was starting to find.